So, welcome back to another episode of Bo Knows. Some people tell you Bo don't know diddly, but I know what I know, and common sense is what I try to use as much as possible when I do these things. I also have a show on iHeartRadio, a podcast that shows up on iHeartRadio that's also, if you're ever in the national market, it's on, I think it's 96.3. It's called Bo Knows Cars, but I got away from talking about the car business several years ago when we were going through the pandemic because it was boring. The car business there wasn't much going on. We didn't have any inventory. I could just tell everybody every week, don't buy cars right now. It sucks. They're too expensive. But I got tired of saying that, so I switched over and started talking about politics and some of the things that I believe in. And my controller, her name is Ashley, came up with a coalition for common sense. And I really don't understand. I've talked about this many times about what it is, the difference between liberals and conservatives, and I believe that there is this divide, and you've got this 10% here, way out here on the right, and this 10% way out here on the left, but that most people reside somewhere in the center. And while we may not always agree on some social issues, for the most part, I think conservatives believe one thing and one thing only. I don't think the government should be involved in it, period. The government shouldn't be involved in marriage between a man and a man, a woman and a man and a woman. It doesn't matter. They just shouldn't be involved. It shouldn't be a governmental issue. I don't think the government should be involved in a lot of things. There's 13 enumerated powers in the Constitution. I think that's what the federal government should be involved in. Otherwise, everything else should be left to the states. But with the Common Sense Coalition, or the Coalition for Common Sense, I was reading something the other day that really bothered me. It struck me as odd, and I didn't understand it. And so I had this Quora Digest. I don't know how Quora Digest started showing up in my emails, but it did. And one of the headlines popped up, and I'm just going to read it to you, and then I'm going to read to you what it says, because it really, truly baffled me. So the headline that I saw was, "Why are Republicans cruel and hateful?" And here was the response from one of the readers on Quora Digest. "I'm currently listening to the audiobook version of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and oh boy, it hits hard. In the last few minutes of the first heartbreaking section, where he describes his time as a prisoner of Auschwitz and at a camp affiliated with Dachau, he tries to understand how the camp guards how the camp guards and the SS were able to act as they did toward their prisoners. And he says, there are two kinds of men. There are decent men and there are indecent men. He describes decent men as those who keep their humanity even in such extreme horror, and indecent men are those who succumb to their base animalistic drives." There was a sentence in there, but animalistic drives. "Those who cease to act as humans, who lose their humanity, their compassion, their kindness, their whatever makes them human. And in any given population, you'll have both, but as an individual, you are one or the other." He describes camp guards who were decent, and he describes other prisoners who were not. And here's the line that really shook me. "And this same division is very clear in the Democrat, Trumpist, MAGA, Republican split. Democrats are generally decent people who haven't lost their humanity. MAGA, Trumpist Republicans are animals, greedy, hateful, racist, sadistic. Their cruelty appears to be the point. They'd be the kind of people who would be happy to torture prisoners and murder them. They would make great SS murderers." What in God's name are you talking about? Where does this exist? In any part of the American society, where do you see this hateful rhetoric coming from anybody on the right? I don't understand it. Now, are there going to be this 10% out here that are just absolutely nuts? Probably. Are there going to be this 10% out here on the left that are just absolutely nuts? Absolutely. It's going to happen in both sections, but let's don't talk about that. Not Trumpist Republicans. It cannot be that 70 million people are all greedy, hateful, misogynistic lowlifes that don't want anything anything good for anybody else. So I decided to look it up. I decided to look up the statistics for charitable giving conservative versus liberal. And lo and behold, what I found, according to the IRS, was conservatives give at a much higher rate, according to tax returns, than do liberals. So if we just use charitable giving as one of the pieces of the puzzle, how can you possibly say we're greedy if we're giving more to charitable organizations than, and let's face it, what faction, if we're going to split it down the middle and say conservative versus liberal, what faction do you think is the faction that has a much higher belief in God, the Almighty, and Christian beliefs? It's going to be the conservatives, right? I mean, Obama talked about us clinging to our God, guns, and Bible. I've heard it over and over and over again. Nancy Pelosi talks about it. People on the left always talk about how we fear God and all we want to talk about is God. Just like fly over states and being a Christian or being whatever religion is somehow bad. But if that's the faction that you're talking about, they're also the ones that are supporting the churches, which do a lot of the charitable giving and aren't always the ones you're writing off on your taxes. So if you just use that one metric of charitable giving, tithing, those types of things, based on IRS calculations, it would seem to me that kind of, the Coalition for Common Sense says, that kind of dissuades that argument that we are greedy, right? So I know lots and lots and lots of car dealers, and all of them, for the most part, I say all, most of them do a very good job at supporting their communities, doing it through charitable donations and running charitable organizations that we donate to all the time, sponsoring golf tournaments that help the needy, sponsoring soccer, Little League soccer, or Little League baseball, all of those things that we get involved in that don't even show up on tax returns because we just write them off as part of normal everyday doing business. We don't do it on our personal returns. The point is, I don't know where this divide came, where this somehow, actually I do. It came from all of the political rhetoric and the rhetoric from the mainstream media that continues to tell you that somehow that 4 hours on January 6th was the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of our government since the Civil War. They continue to try to push this violent rhetoric. And if you listen to where that violent rhetoric is coming from, it is coming from, we got to look, the President of the United States talked about how he wanted to go take Donald Trump out back and beat him up, right? We had Maxine Waters talking about getting in the face of people out, and if you see them in a parking lot or a restaurant or a gasoline station, you get up in their face and tell them they're not wanted there. You've got Chuck Schumer out there talking about releasing the whirlwinds against Kavanaugh and Gorsuch for their decisions on the Supreme Court. You don't hear that kind of rhetoric coming from people in the conservative side. It just doesn't happen. And when you hear it enough, there are enough people out there that hear that rhetoric over and over and over again that start to believe it, that start to fall into that trap of that must be who those people are. The reality is, I think I represent people on the lean more to the conservative side. I lean conservative on financial issues. I lean conservative on fiscal issues. I don't necessarily lean completely conservative on social issues, right? My social belief is, to each person his own. You do you, I'll do me, and we'll all be happy with that. But my freedom, your freedom to be you, and I didn't come up with this, I heard this from a radio host, but your freedom to be you also includes my freedom to be free of you. Just because you believe what you believe doesn't mean I have to believe what you believe or have any part of it. It simply means you have the right to be who you are. Have at it. I'm good. But I have the right to be who I am also. And forcing your way of life or your beliefs on me is not any better than me trying to force mine on you. It doesn't work either way. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, because I have really been giving this some thought, and it is, it's odd to me, right? So The measure of a man, any man, in my opinion, my humble opinion, the measure of any man is how he raises his kids, the offspring, right? When you leave this earth, you leave it hopefully better than you found it in one way or shape or form. But at least if you raise your family well and you do the job you're supposed to as a father, as a husband, as a man, you do so by raising good children. And how being judged by that metric, I don't know how anybody can possibly truly still believe that Joe Biden is a good man. He's got two, Ashley and Hunter, pretty screwed up children. We're talking about a family. I truly can't find a redeeming person in the entire thing, and I am not trying to just bash Joe Biden. I'm looking at it from a factual basis. We've got a man that has said more racist statements, that has raised two children, one of which, his daughter, wrote in a diary about taking showers with her dad until she was almost in puberty. Her words, not mine. We all know, we can all see how that's not right. That will screw some people up. That could be construed as abuse, right? I don't know. But something went wrong in raising those kids in their house. You've got Hunter, who is a known crack addict, whose dad, by the way, wrote him a $50,000 truck repayment loan, right? Repaying him for a truck loan. Now, I don't know about you, but let's just think about this for a second. So supposedly during the time that Joe Biden repaid Hunter this $50,000 check for some loan, it also happened to be at exactly the same time that they got I think it was a $5 million check in or something from some Chinese conglomerate. Don't hold me to that. I'll get the facts for that later. But here's the point. Whether it was how he got the money is irrelevant. What decent father whose son is in the throes of an addiction writes his addicted son, his drug-addicted son, a check for 50 G's? Here's some more money. I know you're in the throes of addiction. I know that you're spending it on drugs, but here's some more money, Hunter. Have at it. Go do your thing. See you when you're done. That's not a loving father. That's not somebody that's taking control of the situation. Sometimes you got to say, look, here's the deal. I'm cutting you off if you don't go to rehab right now. That's a loving father. It's tough love, but it's sometimes the only way you can handle the situation. We've got a man who slept with his dead brother's wife while still married. And let's don't forget that Joe and Jill were having an affair when Jill was still married. Joe's wife had died, but Jill was still married. Got no problems with that. Morally, throughout the years, I can point to 1,000 things. Forget all the lies he's told, but I can point to 1,000 different things that say that morally, he's just not a good person. But if you take all of that and strip it down and just say, let's look at the offspring. Let's look at the children he's raised. We're talking about a man who still, to this day, will not acknowledge that he has an additional 5-year-old granddaughter. Fought it tooth and nail to even acknowledge it. And what does that make Jill? What kind of woman is Jill who just leaves her 5-year-old granddaughter out there and completely ignores her and acts like she doesn't exist? Sets up stockings for all the others. So Hunter made a mistake. Great. No judgment here. He had a drunk night one night with somebody and got her pregnant. She decided to have the baby. At that moment, a good father tells his son to man up. It's time. You have to take care of this child. You have to do the right thing. Irrespective of how you feel or what you think, you've got to do it. But no, they completely did everything they could to act as if it wasn't Hunter's child right up until the moment the paternity test came back and said there's no chance it's not your child. It's 1 in 100 zillion chance that she's not your child. Once she did that, once that happened, that should have been the moment that Joe Robinette Biden stood up and said, that's my granddaughter, and we're going to do the right thing. But you know what they did? They completely ignored it, like it didn't happen. Nope, she's not ours. We only have 6 grandchildren. We only have 6. I got 4 granddaughters. No, Mr. President, you've got 5. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, she exists, and she is your son's daughter. There's no other way around it. How do you do that to a little girl who's innocent and did nothing wrong? And how are you okay with raising your son to shun the responsibility of a child he bore? Or at least fathered, he didn't bore her. I don't understand that thought process. You know, I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Donald Trump is absolutely a New York real estate guy. He's a developer, dealing with some of the toughest unions, dealing with some of the toughest conditions, the toughest regulations. They have gone ever since the day he came down off of that elevator or the escalator and said, I'm announcing my run for president. Ever since that day, they have done everything they can to look into him. They have spied on his campaign. They have made stuff up and hired opposition research and lied about it, turned it over to the FBI, and then recirculated it back through the media to act like they had corroborating evidence to open a FISA warrant to spy on a campaign of the guy that's the leading candidate for the opposition party. And then they spent 4 years saying Russia had zero evidence of it. When the Mueller report came out, there was still nothing. They have looked for in every nook and cranny they can, and I absolutely guarantee you those same slime balls that have done that have looked for everything they can on Don Jr., on Eric, on Barron, even though he's been a child the whole time, on Ivanka, on all of his children, Tiffany. They've looked for everything they can find on him. Guess what they found? Jack. Nothing. You know how you know? Because it would have been the first thing reported. Do you think if that would have been Don Jr.'s laptop, there'd be any chance whatsoever that they'd be out there actually trying to suppress the story? They'd have the contents plastered on the front page of every major news outlet that exists. They'd have it all over Google. You could search, I need some eggs, and it would come up with Don Jr.'s laptop. It absolutely doesn't matter. They've tried everything they can to find something on him and can't find anything other than some made-up charges. Oh, wait, I forgot. They did have that one lady who said, I can't remember the year, but I know that there was a point, it was either 95 or 96, where I was just shopping in this store, and one of the most famous real estate developers in the world came up to me in the middle of this department store during the middle of the day with all of these other people around, and then sexually assaulted me in the dressing room of this place, right? Middle of the day, can't remember the year, but I know that the most famous developer in at least New York, but in most of the world, name me 3 other developers you know the name of, or knew the name of, that had written books. So one of the most famous developers in the world, in his home city, goes into a department store, sexually assaults a woman, and 25 years later, she comes out and tells somebody. And then he has the crime of saying, that's not true, you're lying. Oh, that's slander. You get to lose $80 million because you slandered me by calling me a liar for saying you were a rapist, even though I can't remember any of the details about it. And then we have, let's compare that to Tara Reade, right? We have a woman who says, I was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. Oh, that's not true. Oh no, here's how we know it's true. My mother called into the Larry King show within a week or 2 after it happened, and we have audio proof of my mother talking to Larry King saying, my daughter was sexually assaulted by a very high-ranking official in the U.S. government. I think that's how it was. I'm paraphrasing there. And we're not sure what to do. There were 3 other people she told about it at the time. Nobody would listen to the woman. They buried it, just like they buried every other story. We've got 51 intelligence agents that signed a letter saying that it was Russian disinformation, the laptop that they knew for an absolute fact was not, because the FBI had it for a year. But somehow we're supposed to believe all of these people. It makes zero sense to me. They've done everything they can to vilify that man, and the most they could come up with was some accounting errors that one of his accountants misclassified a check to his attorney as legal expenses. I don't understand it. We get lied to. You know, I was wondering the other day why. Well, I wasn't actually wondering. I knew. I started thinking the other day about what it does to a society that loses trust in its major institutions. So let's think about these institutions. Do you trust academia? So last year there was an article, let's see if I have it here. Yeah. Eric Stewart. Eric Stewart was a criminology professor from FSU that wrote and published several criminology papers or studies that he conducted that were all fake. They had to fire him for gross negligence for faking data that proved lynching makes whites want longer sentences for blacks. That was what he proved. Turns out he faked 100% of the documentation, and they had to fire him for it. That's academia. Forget whether he's black or white, that's irrelevant. He's faking it. Here's one. Academic publisher retracts over 11,900 papers and shuts 19 journals down as it is overwhelmed by fraud. I'm not making it up. Academia. Let me just read this real quick. Academic fraud is forcing Wiley, a major publisher of scientific journals, to close 19 journals after some were overwhelmed by industrial-scale research fraud. In the last 2 years, Wiley has retracted over 11,300 papers containing some fraudulent content. So, you trust in academia? You're trusting those people that are faking all of their data, that it's real? These are the same, by the way, climate change crazies that keep telling you that they have the best data, that you're not faking it, right? Because there's no money involved in it if you are on the side of the climate change crazy. There's no money for that, right? All right, so we can't trust academia. How about the medical community? You want to trust them? Because these are the same ones that told us that we had to social distance for 6 feet because that was going to stop the spread, that we had to, and Fauci's out there lying right now trying to say he never said this, but there's video proof. See, that's the bad thing about the internet now. You got all this proof that comes back to bite you in the butt once you go out. You can't just say, I never said that. There it is right there, you saying it. We're talking about the medical community that told you that you shouldn't take ivermectin, while they're trying to tell you to take it now. Talking about the medical community who said we had to lock down for 30 days to stop the spread. How'd that work? We're talking about the medical community that came out and said, if you, and they said this in the beginning, if you get vaccinated, you will not catch COVID. If you get vaccinated, you cannot spread COVID. Lies. The 6-foot rule, by the way, based on 0 studies. Oh, put a mask on, especially if you're 3 years old, or maybe if you're 17 years old and going to run laps in on the basketball court, put a mask on and restrict your breathing as much as possible because that's going to be healthier for you. Based on 0 scientific evidence, just made it up. Make it up as you go. Get the jab. It'll save lives. Nope. Oh, here's the one I like. There's 0 chance it is conspiracy theory if you believe that the COVID-19 virus, the COVID, I think it's SARS-CoV-2, I think is it's the technical. There's 0, it is absolute bunk. It is conspiracy theory if you believe that that virus could have possibly escaped from that level 5 virology institute that's a mile away from that wet market down there because we think it came from a pangolin. We're telling you for 3 years it come from a pangolin or it came from some other bat or something. Now, we can't find another one that's got that. We never found another animal that has it. But it didn't come from that building that's just a mile down there that's studying those same viruses. That is conspiracy theory. I can't believe you'd even say it. That's the same medical community telling us that crap. You trust them? I don't trust them. How about the media? You trust them? Because we know that 75 to 80% of the media has just lied. They absolutely covered up the Hunter Biden laptop story. They covered it up. They shut down accounts that tried to just share the article. They did everything they could to debunk it because it was 4 weeks before an election. An election, by the way, where a large percentage of people that had said that they had never heard the true story about the Hunter Biden laptop would have changed their vote had they known the laptop was real. But that's not election interference. I read a statistic the other day that said they thought that 5 to 7% of the people would have changed their vote in favor of Donald Trump had they known the laptop was real. The media shut it down. The media has shut down lots and lots and lots of stories. That brings up another one. How about the intelligence community? You believe they got your back? Because these are the same people who have lied about all of the other. They lied on the Pfizer warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. They lied about the laptop. They lied about COVID. They lie constantly. How about the judicial system? You trust them? Do you trust that a judicial system that will take a man who is the leading candidate for president and say, we're going to make 34 misdemeanor charges on the state level for an accounting error that's already past its statute of limitations. We're going to roll those into a campaign finance violation, but we're not going to let the person who is the expert on that campaign finance law actually testify as to what the law says. We're not allowed that. We're going to break all norms by saying you don't actually have to all 12 of you agree on the charges. If 4 of you think it's this charge, 4 of you think it's that charge, and 4 of you think it's that charge, then I'm going to count that as unanimous, even though it's not even close. It's 4 people, 1 charge, 4 people, another charge, 4 people, another charge. Common sense coalition. Do you trust a judicial department that will do that and go after a man that they won't go after you? And oh, by the way, do you trust that same judicial department that will investigate the president, the current president, for having classified documentation in his garage that was dated during times when he wasn't president, so he had no right whatsoever to have classified documents outside of a SCIF, period, and somehow he's got those classified documents, but we're not going to prosecute him, and we're also not going to prosecute Hillary Clinton, as James Comey said. No reasonable prosecutor would bring this case for having a separate server that was known to have classified documents all over it in her basement or in a closet. So she's got classified documents. Joe Biden's got classified documents. We don't do anything to them, but we're going to go after President Trump for the exact same thing. 8 weeks for having classified documents 8 weeks after he left the presidency, but when he didn't even know what was in the boxes. You trust that judicial department that they won't do that to you? Because I don't. You trust a judicial department that will, go look it up, I'm not making this up, that will put a lady in prison, a 74-year-old woman in a wheelchair in prison for protesting in an abortion clinic, but that will pay people for demonstrating and rioting and burning things down in the George Floyd riots in 2020. So, in comparison, one lady throws a Molotov cocktail at a police car, lights it on fire, gets 14 months. A 74-year-old woman protests and prays at an abortion clinic, 24 months in prison. You trust that judicial system? Because I don't. So what happens when you erode trust in all of the institutions that we're supposed to trust have our best interests at heart? I think you get anarchy. But I don't want it. I don't want that to happen. I think that not having trust in those institutions that we have been established to do the best thing for us as an individual and as a country, losing that trust makes us a banana republic. It is devastating to our society. Trust is what has built this, what is the greatest country on earth by far. Believing that they had our best interests at heart and that they were going to do the right thing. But what we're finding out is they don't. They have the right thing in mind for themselves. And it's very elitist, incredibly elitist. So the last thing I want to talk about today is something that I thought was interesting. And I read a study the other day. Oh, well, let me back up. Speaking of this professor at FSU, Eric, whatever his name was that I just mentioned, that fake studies about criminology and what these studies came out, that tags along with California recently passed a law that said your brain is, this is essentially what it says, your brain is not fully developed until you're 26 years old. Okay, now this belongs in that, oh my God, how can you be so hypocritical category. So here's what the law says. Because you're 26, your brain's not fully formed until you're 26, any crime committed prior to the age of 26, you shouldn't be held as responsible for as if you had been older than 26, because your brain's not quite developed yet. You don't have the ability to think as clearly as an adult would and know the difference between right and wrong. Okay, so that's their rule, 26. These are the same people who will tell you that a 14-year-old has the mental capacity to know what sex they want to be for the rest of their life, and we will allow them to have gender-affirming care without their parents' knowledge at 14. So let me get this right. You can commit a murder. Your brain wasn't fully formed, so you don't get the chance to, you didn't really know what you were doing, so you get a lighter sentence than if you were 27. You're 27, you knew what you were doing. 26, you don't quite know what you're doing. But at 14, you're smart enough to know that for the rest of your life, you don't really want to be a girl, you want to be a boy, or you don't really want to be a boy, you want to be a girl. Or, how about we give 16-year-olds the right to vote, to determine who's going to run our country and who's going to run our government. Because, you know, they're smart enough, but they're just not smart enough to know when they commit crimes. How stupid is that? How does that make any sense whatsoever to anybody with any common sense? It doesn't. Not to me. And it shouldn't to you. All right, I got other things to talk about, but I'm going to save them for another day. So for now, signing out. This is Bo Knows. Tune in later. Or don't.